Before I begin this exercise, just a quick note about FTP. In order to run a package with an FTP task, you'll need access to an FTP server. Hopefully that's fairly obvious. You'll also need specific settings to authenticate against the FTP server. As you learn about integration services, you may want to install the FTP server service that Windows includes as part of Internet Information Services. The specific steps to do that vary depending upon the version of Windows that you're using, so you want to check the documentation about how to do that. But what I'm going to do now in this exercise is use an external publicly available FTP site. Okay, so what I'm going to do is use an FTP task, add it to this execute SQL package, and download some of the data that's gathered by the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission, all public information. The SEC gathers a wealth of information from corporations, funds, and individuals, and makes a lot of it available to the public free of charge via an FTP server. What this task is going to do is download some of those files and put them in the staging folder that I created this Create Export Directory task to do. Okay, so this is all part of the EDGAR program of SEC. That's the Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis, and Retrieval System. And so you can go to www.sec.gov in order to get that information. Now, this is all for the U.S. government, the information that they've collected. But I assume other countries around the world have collected the same kind of information. All right, and again, I'm going to add it to this same execute SQL package. So I'll come over here to the SSIS toolbox here, find the FTP task, and add it to the package. And I'll right-click on it, select Rename, and I'm going to name it Download Edgar Data. Again, that's the name of the program under which the SEC collects this information. All right, I'll double-click on it to open up the task editor. And as usual, we need to specify a connection. So I don't have any FTP type connections within this package yet. So I'll select New Connection, and that opens up this FTP Connection Manager editor. So notice how this is different. This is specifically a connection to an FTP server. Could be local, could be remote, whatever. But it's a different dialog box than if I was trying to connect to a file in the file system versus a SQL server someplace and other kinds of connections. So you quickly find that in integration services, there's a lot of different dialog boxes that collect the specific kind of information that you need in order to create a connection manager or other kinds of objects. All right, so I need to specify the server. That's a little bit misleading to say the server name. This isn't some name of it. It's actually the URL of it. So this is ftp.sec.gov. I'll use the default port 21. And anonymous login. This is publicly accessible, but if it was a secured FTP that I needed to provide a username and password, enter them there, obviously. And then there's a few other items here that you can set. All right, so once I think that I've configured everything correctly, I can click on this test connection. It'll go out, see if it can make a connection to that server. And it succeeded. All right, so everything's fine. Click on OK. And now we have this FTP connection manager that's defined. And by the way, if you're trying this at home, obviously the Security and Exchange Commission's FTP site is not under our control, LearnNow's, mine, or anything like that. It's a real website operated by the federal government. In the future, it may go away or move to another server or host address. So if you find that there isn't any FTP server at ftp.sec.gov anymore, you might try things like ftp.microsoft.com or ftp.mozilla.org instead. You may have to poke around. You can do a Google search. I actually found this, the EDGAR FTP server, just by Googling FTP sites and found it. Or you can use an FTP server on your local host, like I talked about earlier. Set it up within Windows and use local as the server name and put some files in a location there. So just be aware of that. And by the way, the ftp.microsoft.com site is kind of interesting. Microsoft years ago, I remember in the earliest days of working with DOS and subsequent versions of operating systems from Microsoft, having to go to ftp.microsoft.com to download files is a matter of course. So things have changed quite a bit. But there's actually still a lot of stuff located there. But it does seem to be something that they're gradually clearing out and not using quite as much of, at least as far as publicly exposed. All right, next thing I need to do is go over here to the file transfer page here, because I need to specify the operation. In this case, I don't want to send files, which is the default. I want to receive files. But notice that I can also perform various other kinds of operations on local and remote directories, assuming I have the proper permissions on the local directories to do that. So this is where the FTP task has some overlap with the file system task. But in this case, I want to receive files. And notice once again, when I specify the operation, the list of properties changes because it needs different information to perform the different kinds of operations. Okay, so next I need to set the local path. And I'll select this, and notice that I have an existing staging item here. Now you might be tempted to use staging here, but that's not going to work. Remember earlier, I created that as part of the file system task to create a directory. So in this case, what I need to do is select a new connection because I need a connection that I can use in order to specify the location of downloading files, not the directory that I need to create. So I'll click on New Connection. Usage type, I'm going to leave to existing folder. And now I can browse to that. So it's on Computer and C and Staging right there. Okay, because that's an existing folder. All right, so I set the browser. Notice that my little warning message went away because I gave it the information that it needed. Oh, and by the way, existing folder is the only option there. I meant to point that out to you. So you can't really change that anyway for this particular operation. Okay, so creating the connection to where those files are going to go, and now it's created staging 1 because as you can see it's using the pattern of using the folder name. Staging already exists, they have to be unique, and so I have staging 1. Okay, next thing I need to do is specify the remote path. This identifies the folder on that remote server where I want to retrieve the files from. And you can also specify the mask that identifies which files you want. Okay, so I select this, and I can either type it in directly or I can click on that button there. And in most cases, it'll go out to that remote server. And just like, well, if you use FileZilla or most of the other common FTP client applications, you can actually navigate around the folders on the remote server. So it's taking a bit of time. Hopefully it'll pop up a box and give information about those remote folders. Okay, and as you see, it times out. I have found this to be fairly unreliable. Sometimes I'll get an exception message. I forget what the exception says, but it seems to have some problem when you're first creating the FTP task. Later on, when you're working with an existing FTP task, it seems to be a lot more reliable. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, yeah, see, it's not giving me any folder. It just couldn't retrieve the information for some reason. So I'll just type it in. So it'll be /Edgar, full index, and I want all the zip files. So there's various subfolders of Edgar on the SEC site, different kinds of information. I'm not even sure what all different kind of information it has. But the SEC provides those Edgar files in a few different formats, including uncompressed files, .sit or sit files, .gz, and .z. The uncompressed files comprise many tens of megabytes, and downloading all those files is going to take up a lot of bandwidth. The zip files are just a few megabytes, so that's a lot more manageable on a fast connection. So that's why I wanted to use a file mask of star.zip. Okay, press enter, and we've defined that remote path. So when you're first working with an FTP task, you may want to use, like I said, FileZilla or your favorite FTP client application in order to go out and explore the FTP server and see what directories are available and get the path correct, and then just post it in. And that's going to be a lot easier in most cases. Okay, that's all we need to do to configure the task, so I'll click on OK, and we have no red X, and theoretically we're all set to download some files. So I'll right-click on it, and I will select Execute Task. quick compilation stage, and there's the status. It's kind of a yellow color, sort of a gold color, I guess. And Windows Firewall has blocked access. That's okay. And there it continues. And so now it's going out and downloading all of those files, the zip files in that particular directory. So once again, to warn you, there is a lot of data there. It may take a significant amount of time. I've only looked at the actual contents of the folder a couple times. I don't know if it varies widely over time, every day, every week, every month, every year, whatever. So just be careful with downloading data like this. Again, you might want to use an FTP client to go in and see how many there are and what the sizes of the zip files are. Okay, so while it's doing that, we can go over here to Files Explorer, or Windows Explorer, go to Staging, and you can see that it is in fact downloading some files. And so we have one that's a couple meg, another one that's 3 megs, another one, so that one completed a couple megs, and so on. Okay, and now the task executed successfully. It grabbed all of the zip files, and so we get the green icon to indicate success. All right, so once again, the complete total of all the files is company, form, master, and xbrl.zip, and there are the sizes. And if you're interested, take a look at the data. Essentially, the zip files contain indexes into text files that contain actual company data, and then that gives you the location on the FTP server where you can look at the actual company information or whatever it is that you're looking for. But again, the scenario here is we download these files, we unzip them, they contain data that we want to import into a database, and we would then have other tasks and probably a data flow in order to perform that import kind of step.